Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Flutter Boring Development Show. I'm your host, Fitz, and it's just going to be me today again, because last time I was working on the favorites list in the Hacker News app. This one where we go over here into the drawer and we open up the drawer and we click on the favorites, and there's a list of favorites there. That's what we were working on last time. Before that episode, it was just some text that said favorites. And you'll notice here, and especially if you watched the last episode, there's a bunch of to-dos left. It's only 4, but it's a bunch of to-dos. And so I'm going to try to address that here today. We're going to clean up our favorites list. We're going to make sure that that works okay, and that we can actually add some more functionality, like actually tapping on these things and having something happen. So before we get there, I will say that I'm starting this quite a bit later than I intended, because I went to run the app before the show just to make sure that everything was working okay. And of course it wasn't. Nothing was working fine in any way. I had upgraded my Flutter between this episode and the last episode, and all my dependencies were mismatched. So if we go over to the terminal, we can see here lots of dark red text, which is probably hard to see on the recording, but dependency mismatch here, dependency mismatch here, dependency mismatch here. It keeps going. I made some changes. It keeps going. I made some changes. It keeps going. I made some changes. I tried to switch to a different one. I got pubget to mostly work, and then the actual runtime didn't work. And we keep going down. You'll notice my scroll bar over here is kind of smallish, and we keep going through, and there's a bunch of stuff that I did to try to figure this out. I finally got it working. Of course, it looks like there's a stack trace here to work through. We will get there. But just to look at some of the things that I had done here, we'll go back to my editor and see, back to pub spec. You'll notice a number of changes here. The little blue dots here are the changes that I've made, mostly in the dev dependencies. So I went through a bunch of different things, and I was trying to do the bare minimum of upgrading things to make sure that things work, because it's really tempting. And of course, this is going to cause everything to break. I'm going to cancel that out. If you just do Flutter, I'll make this bigger, pub outdated, you get a nice list of, it goes through your pubspec.yaml and finds all of the dependencies that you're working on and how out of date they are. So it'll go through and say things like, well, for built collection, you are currently listing 4.2.2 as the dependency, but you could upgrade that to 4.3.2 if you wanted to. So that's the latest, and we'll have to move this a little bit over there. And it goes through and does that for every single one of your dependencies, which is great and awesome. And so you could pretty easily think, I'll run that again to get the formatting better. You could pretty easily go through this and look, well, I'm going to just take all of the things listed here, and for my current, if it's upgradable, I'm going to upgrade it. But that's challenging. If you'll notice, a couple of these are pretty big-ish bumps. We've got some that are pretty simple, like crypto is going to 2.1.4 to 2.1.5. That's fine. But we've got this 0.52 to 0.510. We've got a 5.0 to 5.5. And so these big jumps can be problematic if you just take them and assume everything's fine and go for it. The major version usually means there's major breaking changes. And so when you're going through and checking all of your dependencies, it can be fraught with peril. There are dragons there. And so what I tried to do here was I tried to look at the very first dependency that had the problem. So if I scroll all the way back up near the top of when things happened, you can see all of the different problems that I worked through. Oh, and my scroll back is out. What we would have seen is that the test dependency was the first one that was causing problems. There was test and test API were depending on things that Other things were depending on lower versions of or higher versions of. And so I looked at that one first and I bumped it up just to the bare minimum. If we check out the change, we'll see that I bumped it from 1.6.1 to 1.15. So I was able to just barely increment that up a little bit. And I think there's even a higher version, but I didn't go all the way up to the most recent version. I just wanted to upgrade things to the point that things worked. Again, I was trying to compile it and run it, and nothing was working. And so here I bumped it up to 115, but of course that caused problems with the built value generator, which needed a different version of test. And so I had to bump that up to, what did I bump it up to? 7.0. Oh my gosh. Major version bump. So I went from 6.5 to 7.0. That caused some problems. And so when we then went through and looked at the problems, I tried to rebuild some of the generated code and got all sorts of problems. And of course, there's an issue here about that. There's an issue here about something similar. And it all comes down to there were some bugs. People fixed them and issued new versions. And so I had to bump up and try to find a new one. And so, for example, I had to add this build resolvers. That was a recommended solution in, I believe it was this issue, to say, I guess it was this issue, to say I want build resolvers at least 1.3.11. So sure, I'll try 1.3.11 and see if that works. It feels a little bit like a guessing game. And in some ways it is. I could take the time to go through and figure out what were all of the different changes between all of the different versions of all of my dependencies, but we've got a lot of dependencies here, and I didn't really want to go through that effort. So I was just trying to figure out what can I upgrade to make sure that this thing works with a minimal amount of changes or changes to my functionality. So I got there, and then that that required me to upgrade the more generators, which then we ran into a problem where there was a particular bug in 0.39.13 of the analyzer, and so we had to override that to be at 39.14 instead. And finally, I think at that point, things worked. So I did cancel it out, the running in the terminal. So let's try to see what happens when I run it here, assuming I have the right thing open. Open up main, and we will hit run. More changes. Ooh, always fun. Okay. Is that just a Visual Studio Code thing, or is it our actual Flutter running? Our pod file is out of date. That's expected. We can probably update that. Fortunately, I'm not running this on a real device. I'm just running it on the simulator. And so the pod file does things like define your developer certificate and other things, mostly what your dependencies are. But so if we've changed any of the dependencies, that would make a difference. And I did. So we might want to do that after this. But looks like we're running. Hooray, we're running. Great. Okay, so now we can get to what we're actually here to do, which is to look at this favorites list and all these to-dos left around. Some of these are going to be simpler than others. I was taking a look at it before the show and trying to see which path I wanted to take here. So allowing going back and forth between the top stories and the new stories from the favorites. If you recall, we'll go back to the drawer, back to the favorites. Down here, we have our top stories and our news stories. If I click on one of these from the favorites list, go back to my terminal, we get some exceptions. So those don't work right now. So we have, we're trying to get the length on something that's null. Ooh, null safety might help. That might be a future episode. And so that particular thing doesn't work. So we're going to have to do a full restart. So capital R, restart, get our code back in a normal state. Great. So that one's going to be a little bit tricky. We'll figure that one out as we go. So this other to-do, make favorites act a little bit like top and new stories. So for that, I think the main thing that I want to look at is when I click on one of these, I would like to read the story. So I click on any of these, nothing really happens. And I click on the star, nothing really happens. I would like to have a feature where I can actually read the story that I favorited. I made it a favorite for a reason. I probably liked the story and wanted to read more, or read it again in the future. Maybe follow up on the comments. We'll check in on that in a bit. But let's first make it tappable. So we have here our on tap, and we can pretty easily say tapped the favorite. We can start with just that, validate that. More stack traces. So I tap the favorite and hooray, my favorite is tapped. Great. Okay, so that on tap function is being called as expected. Perfect. What I actually want to do is load up the URL for that. And so here, if you recall from last episode, we've got our snapshot, which was the favorite from the database. We're passing that into a StreamBuilder so that we can just get those results from the database whenever they're available. And those come in as a list of favorite objects. So for the title of it, we just did snapshot.data to get the title. So let's do snapshot, get our data. And there's a slight improvement we can do here. We get our index. And then we do have a URL here. So that's great. We've got a URL that we can use. And if we wanted to just validate things with our printf debugging, refer to my and Philip episodes about debugging. But I click on these and we get our URL. Great. Okay, that works. And there's already a feature for pulling out the URL and loading it into a web view. If we let's restart the app so we can get back to the actual top source. I noticed that app bar was still saying top rather than favorite. That's something else to do. I click on these, and I guess this opens the story. Yeah, okay, that button opens the story. So we have a button within our story item that gives us the URL, the web view for it. So we've got that feature already. And let's try to find where that is. So I'm just going to go to main and search for URL. We've got a Hacker News web page. What does that thing do? It's a stateless widget. It takes a URL. That seems useful. And it builds a new scaffold with a web view inside of it with the initial URL of that and unrestricted JavaScript. Excellent. Cool. So that's fun. And then the comments opens up the comments as expected. Okay. So I would like to just take this thing. And what I don't want to do here, so that I've got this widget, I don't want to rewrite the widget. What I would really like to do is just use this widget without any other changes. So what I'm going to do here actually is let's within here, I'm going to make let's see, we've got pages, we've got widgets, we've got a headline, loading info, search. I'm going to do a new one, and we're going to call it hnpage.dart. Okay, so I've got that created, and I'm going to copy that out into hnpage.dart. Of course, there are dependencies that I need to fix. Most of them are probably going to be solved by just importing our correct packages thanks to autocomplete. Great. Okay, we've got that, and now this is going to have to, if I search for URL again, to bring up that, we've got this error, but all we need to do is import that package. It's probably going to throw it up in some random position up here. That's fine for now, as long as we still work. So, as all good development processes are, I made a change. Relatively trivial, but let's refresh, make sure that it actually still works, and sure enough, it does. A nice article about fresh asphalt. Cool. Fresh asphalt, air pollution, great. And so that makes it such that we can use this HN page package, and I'm going to copy that import in our favorites page. So I got that. Now, we can look at using that URL within that HN page thing. So I think we can do more or less the same thing that we did here in the main. This is one of the tab views within. I guess it's part of the page, but so this is happening when we click on the article. We have the option of going into the Hacker News webpage. So there's a couple of different options, but they all do more or less the same thing. They take a material page route and toss a Hacker News web page into that. So it's just an on-pressed with a navigator. Let's see what happens. Let's blindly copy some code and see what happens. We'll take that, pop it in there. We've got our Hacker News webpage. We've got a thing called an article, which we'll have to deal with. That may, in fact, be the slight optimization that I mentioned from earlier. So if we have article equals snapshot data of whatever we currently are. And I'm going to go ahead and declare this directly as a favorite, because we know from up here that it is a favorite. And so that ought to be helpful, at least in some way. And then we'll close that out. We don't need that. Okay, now let's go back. Hot reload. Okay, let's try this out. We go to our favorites. Ooh, what is that stack trace? Length was called on null of list favorites from line 26. Let's check that in a moment. Okay, well, that's currently not working. Line 26 of this. Are we sure? Pages, favorites.dart. Is that where I am? Favorites.dart. Line 26. And let's see that line 26 is actually to do. Interesting. We were calling length on null. What did it say was null? It said null was probably from the result of the StreamBuilder. So that could be this thing right here. So we've got the item count. Let's see if our snapshot happens to come in as null. I am always forgetting the Dart null operators. Again, null safe might help us here. We'll look at that in a future episode. So just trivially speaking, if it's null, then we'll do 0. If not, we'll do this thing. I always, doesn't matter how often I do this, need to look up the Dart null operators. Doesn't matter how many times I write some code. So double question. All right. Turns the left unless it's null, in which case we turn the right. So let's simplify this. You'd think by now, oh well. Question, oops. Question 0. Okay, hopefully that will help us here. Let's go back here. Let's do a full restart just in case. And we'll go back to our favorites list. Oh, we still get that. Oh, there's another. Now we're on line 27. I click on something. Oh, I at least get the web page now. That's good. So our Hacker News web page functionality is working. I can go back and forth between the two. That's great. So we've got that part working. Now let's look at that that length of null. Oh, I see. So, okay. I did this wrong. Because it's not the length that is null here, it's the data that is null. So if that's null, I want to return 0. Ooh, okay. Might be able to do this. Null safe operation there. Let's look at that cheat sheet. What do you say about conditional property access? That is exactly what I want. It's equivalent to doing that. So I can do returns null if the thing is null. So I'd imagine what does our list view builder say about if our count comes in as null? Item builder, item count, providing a non-null. But what happens if list view's item count is null? That's what I want to figure out here. Assert that its item count is null or greater than 0. But what if it is null? What do you do if you're null, Mr. Item Count? I don't know if item count is a Mr. I don't want to project anything about that. Item count. Oh, but then we go into assert that it's not null. Oh, that's because it's the separated builder. I skipped over. So all we do. Oh, we have to go into the sliver child delegate and look at the child count here. If null, the number of children is determined by the least index for which builder returns null. Okay, so if we have a null item count, then we need to look at here. So instead of returning a list tile, if our we'll just do this. If snapshot data is null, we'll return null. And then this is a bit of a hack. I just want to make sure that we're doing this. We don't get null things around. Let's look at our favorites. Ooh, look at that. No stack trace. Great. So that seems to have fixed that particular problem. There wasn't even a to-do about that. Fun times. Look, fixing things that aren't even listed as things to fix. So, but that means we are now load the actual article itself. We can do that. I've clicked on this multiple times to get this to load, and sure enough, these load great. So, to do, done. Great. All right, next one. Make the icon tappable to remove the favorite. Now I think this one should be a little bit easier. So I believe somewhere in here is a remove favorite. Aha, look at that. So again, this is part of our just top or new stories list here, where we just have the icon button in the leading bit of the expansion tile is an icon button. So let's just steal that. Let's blindly copy some more code again. And then instead of the star, I'm going to do that. So, and I don't need to return it. I just need the icon button itself. So we've got our icon button. It's still a star. It's the filled in star because it's part of the favorites list. And this is going to get tricky here in a second. I don't need a semicolon there. I just need that. Let's format the code. Except I can't because we have an error somewhere. Where's the problem? Unused variable. Oh, well, we'll get to that one. Okay. But I've got the article, get the ID. I'm going to get rid of my search. And then what we should be able to do, let's reload. And if I click on that thing, let's come back. Let's click on the star and reload the favorites page. It looks like these are actually removing it. But thus far, we don't actually update any state. So we remove the thing from the favorites list, and so I can click on all these and we get the nice little inkwell button feature, and then I have to reload the favorites page to actually get it, and there's some interesting things happening there. But we don't actually reload the state. So what we'll have to do, so I at least made this tappable to remove the favorite. But now what I need to do, update state when removed. All right, I've replaced an old to-do with a new to-do. More to-dos everywhere. Aha. All right. Now the easiest way to do this would be, let's just wrap this. And what did I mess up? There you go. On pressed. Why are you giving me an error? Title is not defined. Yep, I understand that. Got curly braces. I've got that. What did I do? Help. Oh, I see. So this is part of the icon button. I should not have deleted that parenthesis because that was required. Great. Now we're better. All right, I helped myself. I'm just staring at the code and helping myself. There we go. All right. Now the simplest way that we could do this, I could set state here, and we're going to do this. The simplest way to make sure that we update the state when things are removed. This isn't quite going to do what we want it to do. Actually, I need to reload. I click on this, and the thing that's happening here is because we've got a builder within a builder here, and it's coming from the snapshot. What we really want to do is rebuild this whole thing potentially, because we are not removing it from the list of the snapshot. We're removing it from the database itself. So there's a couple ways we could think about looking at this. One, we could instead of removing the favorite from the database only, we could also remove it from the snapshot. So we could say like snapshot.data, whatever index this happens to be, and then like remove or the equivalent of that. We do have a handle on the actual object, so we could say something like we've got this list, and I'd like to remove, I could remove the thing at that list. I could remove the object that matches the article. However, doing a remove like that while we're in the middle of building the list, probably not a good idea. Let's see what happens. Let's restart. Ooh boy, we got more stack traces. But I've removed all the favorites. So let's actually get this thing populated with some favorites. I'm just gonna go and whatever's up top here. Ooh, something about Skia, that's fun. Ooh, we've got another stack trace. More bugs to fix. So I've got some things here, and while we've got that open, I'm gonna click on that. Here's where exactly what I was looking at. So I was trying to remove an object from a list, but it's not exactly the error I was expecting to see, but it's a similar idea where we've got this thing coming from the stream. So we've got the StreamBuilder that's pulling something from the database. It's a future list. That list is our list of favorites. And we're trying to edit that list as it's coming through. Not the best idea. So that's probably not going to work. Let's take that away. Let's restart just for fun. Make sure that most things still work. Yep. Set state called within a closure that returned a future. Maybe it was marked as async. Likely. We've got the async snapshot up here. So that's kind of giving us some hints that doing this set state in here, probably not exactly what we want to do. So I can remove this, make sure that we're just removing on pressed. But now we need to make sure that this StreamBuilder can update. So this is not updating the state. We want to update the list. And remove. So the database has updated list. Now this is a list tile within a list view builder. So the list view builder has to be rebuilt based on the data within the snapshot, but the snapshot isn't actually changing because we're changing the source that the snapshot is coming from. So the StreamBuilder needs to be updated. Okay. Now, what does the StreamBuilder say about needing to be updated? Let's go up. Connection state, that's something we haven't handled yet. So we got our StreamBuilder builder. If we have an error, we do some things. Otherwise, we try to build it. For waiting active. Okay, so this is saying that we should probably check that. That might help with some of our, when I was doing this and it kind of did that weird thing where we had some overlapping rendering. I'm guessing this probably would help with that. Our page route builder might have something to do with that as well. We'll check on that. Maybe, just maybe, I should add a new to do. Let's see, within the drawer, and the drawer is adding. Okay, I'm getting distracted. Let's come back to our StreamBuilder. And instead of reading the sample, let's read through the documentation. Widget that built itself on the latest snapshot of an interaction with the stream. Yep, true. Widget rebuilding is scheduled by each interaction using set state, but is otherwise decoupled from the timing of the stream. The builder is called at the discretion of the pipeline and will thus receive timing-dependent subsequence of the snapshots that represent the interaction with the stream. I'm sure someone watching this knows what that means. While talking, I would have to do some thinking to get that to work in my brain. And rebuilding is scheduled by each interaction using set state. But that stack trace told us using set state was dangerous. Maybe I didn't do it in the right place. Actual sequence depends on the relative timing of events. And so if that StreamBuilder is pulling data from that database, hopefully that database is just sending us the records right in order as fast as it can. That's what I would do if I were a database. Fortunately, I'm not, but that would mean... Why am I doing that there? That seems... like autocomplete error. Random theme of accent color. So let's see. We've got our stream, which is that. And we're updating the favorites. What we could do is... if we're removed, let's do an icon instead of a star. We can do, oops, what did I do? I hit the wrong button. That's what I did. Instead of a star, we can do the, what is it, star outline, star border. And then I need that actual var removed equals false. So what I can do here, it's kind of a temporary hack to get this to at least show something to the user to indicate that this thing has been removed. So I'm going to bring my set state back. And all I'm going to do in this set state is set removed to true. That's not going to do what I want because everything is now removed. Ooh, look at that. Go back to my terminal, restart. Click on that. It's gone. Oh my gosh. Interesting. That didn't happen the way I expected it to happen. Let's do a full restart. Let's add some favorites in. Here we go. Asphalt and air pollution, Skia, and then a number of others. Ooh, there you go. There's that stack trace that we saw earlier. Something about URL is null for that story. I wonder if that's because it's just a thing on Hacker News. Interesting. All right, we go to our favorites. We've got some favorites in here. I know the transition is kind of funny. When we click on those and remove them, it's actually removing them now. Maybe I hadn't restarted fully before. So I don't think I need this removed. The set state might be useful, but that removed is not. And let's bring this back to just the icon star. Let's check what was happening there. So one positional argument found, 0 there. I knew this is not, it's just an empty set state. That is what it is. We'll come back to it. There's a lot of we'll come back to's in this episode. All right, let's put these favorites back in the list. Go to my favorites, unclick. All right, seems to be okay. And I'm gonna predict that it was the remove favorite on the thing that the stream was pulling from within set state is probably where we were going awry. So, okay, all right. Now update the list and removed. Great, we've got that. Maybe not best practice. We can add edit to do. We can do me. Verify that this is or isn't best practice. Great. Now we've got another to do. Excellent. Okay. Now, allow going back to top stories and new stories. Let's see if we can handle that one for a second. as I get distracted by code that we no longer need. Well, going back to, well, actually, now that I've got my cursor on line 26 here, make favorites act like top and new stories. So the only feature missing there, well, I'm sure there's more that I'm forgetting, but the main feature we're missing here is that top and new stories have that comments page that we can look at. And maybe that's why I favorited this article, was to read some of the comments. But add comments to the favorites page. Now, there would be an easy way to do that if the favorites object and the article object were in fact the same object or sub-features of each. So maybe we'll look at that in a future episode. But right now, allow going back to top stories and new stories. I want to look at this. It's been an interesting one, a lingering one in the realm of this app, just because of what it is. So right here, right now, and I'll go and refresh again. List tile of favorites. This is in the settings page, in the drawer rather, where for the favorites page in particular, we're pushing a replacement route. So we are taking our navigator, wherever that is set from, and just overlaying the new favorites page on top of it, and popping the current one. We do that at top stories, and so our app bar is still here. Both our top app bar and our bottom navigation bar. So we see here that when something is tapped, we get the index of it and we try to switch to it. So we'll tap these things, and of course we'll check there. We have our on tap handlers throwing a exception. All right. Here's what's happening. Scroll controller is not attached to any views. From positions is not empty within the scroll controller. Either an error in the framework itself, or we should provide more information. Interesting. Okay, so it's on tap because scroll controller was not attached. Where is that on tap? On tap, page controller is a page controller. We're animating to this one. But because we've replaced the route, rather than having something still there, what's curious to me is that the app bar and whatnot are still here, and I can still go through. That's funny. That app bar is a totally different color. Is that because our settings page has its own app bar? Ooh, it does. Look at that. That's cool. Maybe we need to do something similar with our favorites page then. So let's give this a shot. Let's. This is going to get super nested, but we're going to wrap this in another scaffold. And what I want to try to do here first is see that this replaces the scaffold that was already there. So we just want an app bar and a bottom navigation bar. I guess it's a bottom navigation bar, which probably takes some things by default. Required argument items. And let's just do an icon of icon data. Sorry, not icon data. Icons dot, let's do the AC unit. That's the first one. What do you expect? Can't be assigned to the list type item, bottom app bar item. Okay, fine. Because we just needs to be a more complex widget than just a normal widget. And we're testing things. So testing. And the icon, let's do the icons dot, we can do the first one again, AC unit. All right, so now we have a new app bar, new scaffold with an app bar and a bottom navigation bar for the favorites page. I'm expecting that, like the settings page, it brings in its own content like that. And the new app bar, new bottom bar, although I did just add one. So, okay, all right. Refresh. Refresh. We've got our top stories back. Let's click on our favorites. Oh my gosh, errors abound. Bottom navigation bar, position, a failed assertion, items.length greater than or equal to 2. Oh, so we need at least 2. Okay. At least 2 items. Let's make sure that these do hopefully what I would expect them to do. Testing 2. Let's make this a different thing, like an alarm. Alarming. Okay. Fortunately, my restarts are working pretty quickly. Go to our favorites. And sure enough, I've got a new app bar there, but not the new bottom navigation bar. So because we're doing the replace named here, it's just replacing the body here, not the full thing. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to remove this scaffold that I added in. If these buttons work, there we go, remove widget. Where did my remove widget go? Huh, okay. We'll have to do that by hand then. Instead of returning this, we return this. And I'm sure there's one of these that I have to remove. Okay, there we go. And do a refresh. There we go, we got that back. Okay. So curious, let's see. Of course, those aren't gonna work still because failed assertion positions is not empty. So we need to get it's lost all the state of this. I could make it a new tab. That would be one way. What is settings doing? Settings, we're just pushing a random new name. I'll have to talk to someone about why they wanted to do a replacement instead of just a new one. Let's see. Because settings is a whole new one. Let's just do that. So, back to our favorites page, I'm going to bring back that scaffold with our app bar. I don't need a bottom navigation bar for this, for the favorites. So let's pull that out. And let's, instead of doing the replacement, we'll have to have a talking to with someone. I don't know why. To figure out why past devs wanted to do a replacement. Okay, all right. Now, instead of that, we're gonna do push named on just the normal navigator. Of course, this is all gonna change with Navigator 2.0. But for now, we don't have that, at least in my current build. I'm working off of stable, so that's that. Navigator push named for the on tapped. And we'll move this into there. And refresh. Okay, we got our top stories, we've got our favorites, that no route for route settings, favorites and all. Okay, because the settings is doing We had on generate route. Okay, yeah, there was a confusing thing here. Remember about how this generate route works. The name of its parameter is it's a route settings, but one of the routes we have is a settings. Okay, we don't need I don't need to have it have its own transition. Favorites, and then this is the favorites page. Favorites page. And the favorites page does not take an animation. It doesn't take anything. And why am I return page route builder like that, and save, get some formatting in. Okay, so now there actually is a route for that page, and we go back to our favorites, click on it. Hooray, that did that. Does our back actually work? Ooh, and it even keeps the drawer there. Interesting. Maybe we should figure out how to close that. Okay. Let's add some favorites in. Open up the drawer, click on favorites. We've got some favorites there. Move that text. Let's move that text. Let's look at the favorites page. Instead of having this there, let's put the title text in the title. So we don't need that. We've got our app bar with the title text of favorites. That should move up there. Great. And we hit back and the drawer is still open. What would be nice, and does the settings page do the same thing? It does. Can we close the drawer when it's clicked? Let's find out. So when let's go back to where that tap is. So we're within the drawer. What are my options in the drawer? Not a lot. Okay. Drawer edge draggable, enable drag, scrim color, edge width, drawer drag start behavior, things and drawer, end drawer, extend body. Let's see. Flutter, drawer, close, programmatically. Look at that. That sounds, when a user opens a drawer, adds a drawer to the navigation stack, therefore to close the drawer, call navigator.pop. Aha, okay. That's some helpful text there. Do I want to do it before I push it or after? Well, let's try it out. Let's see what happens. Oh, we need a context. Context. Okay, try again after fixing the above. I did. Thanks. So we can add more of those favorites. Hey, look at that. There's some maybe some transition work that we'd want to do there. But for now, I've got my favorites list. I can click on it to open up the web page and exit that. I can click on the star to remove it. And I can click on back to go back to the top stories. So look at that. Let's go back to the favorite page. And while going back to the top of news stories, got that. We've got that. Ooh, that star. And we've got some new to-dos, mostly for me and my own education, but we've resolved a bunch of to-dos. We've gotten some things working. We've gotten the favorites list pretty much done. There's one potential, it's just a new feature rather than actually getting it to work, of adding the comments into the page. But things seem to be working pretty well with this favorites page. So hopefully you learned some with me. I certainly learned a lot just in this hour, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.